Well, good evening. How is everyone tonight? You ready for some movies? Well, a lot of people ask me, well, why Silent Movie Day? Well, why did you and your colleagues decide to do something like that? And well, we were just really kind of surprised there wasn't already such a thing. They have days for coffee and pretzels and you name it. It was during the pandemic, so it's kind of what we did during our pandemic vacation in those early dark days when we were learning how to work from our homes. And we were very happy to see how it's spread. It's now international. So we had a number of venues over in Europe screening films this year. And the 9/29 date doesn't really mean anything. We kind of picked it we chose it that way, so it's not associated in any particular moment in silent film history, but which is intentional. So that way, if it was Buster Keaton's birthday, then you've got the Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd people upset, and so it was kind of a neutral territory that we could just kind of call a day. And really, the day itself is not too important. It's the events that take place and all the screenings and things like that. So here I am, and a lot of the reason I'm standing here on this stage and the fact I'm working at the UCLA Film and Television Archive is because of Mr. Browning and Mr. Chaney. And how did that come to be? Well, many years ago, in my youth, I worked at a art house cinema, one screen cinema, changing movies every couple of days. And after a while, I had enough. They had enough confidence in me, so they said, "Well, why don't you program maybe some silent films and do something for a weekend program?" Well, there was a film that I'd always wanted to see, and I said, "Great! I finally have a chance. I'll get a hold of." Whoever is handling MGM's rights, and I'll book London After Midnight. How many here have seen London After Midnight? Oh, great. Let's talk after the screening. Well, as most of you already know, it's a lost film. And that's when I became aware, not every film is kept on a vault shelf somewhere? And then you realize, well, the business part of show business and just the nature of film itself all conspired, and we've lost so much of our silent film heritage. And it's really where film begins, right? And the language of film was developed, and these are crucial periods of time. So to understand what we're seeing today, at least certainly technically and a lot of the way visually, they didn't have the inconvenience of a soundtrack. They were using the images to tell most of the story with occasional title thrown in. So that's my story and how I am here. Todd Browning is kind of our guest this evening. He was born in Louisville, Kentucky in 1882, and at the age of 16, he ran away from home. And surprise, surprise, he joined a circus. He joined actually more of a sideshow, traveling sideshow. And most important, I think, interestingly there is he performed for a while as the hypnotic living corpse, where they would put him in a casket and bury him for a couple of days. And he was a sideshow attraction. He's buried under there, and they're hoping that when they dig him up, he'll still be alive. These usually were 2 days events, 48 hours in a coffin. You can imagine how fun that would be. From there, he did work for Ringling Brothers for a little while, and then he went into vaudeville. And I think it was around 1906 he changed his name. He was born Charles Albert Browning, and then he changed his name to Todd Browning. And it's interesting, and a lot of you already know this, but he spells it with only one D, which the German word for death is Tod, which is T-O-D, which is maybe another bit of foreshadowing on how his career may go. They think the theory is as early as 1909 he started acting in movies and comedy, like one reel, two reel comedies. He eventually was hired at Biograph by D.W. Griffith, and worked with him a little while until Griffith left, and he followed Griffith out to the West Coast. And then an event happened that kind of changed his outlook on things. He and a group of his friends were partying out in Los Angeles and enjoying themselves, I think, a little too much. And on the way home, the car that he was driving encountered fog and, unfortunately, a train crossing. and their car crashed into the side of a train, and injuring himself and one of his passengers very seriously, and the other passenger was killed. And from that point, you can kind of see how it affected his filmmaking. Comedy kind of drops away, and he starts getting into more serious themes. So what happens to him? Well, he makes a few films for Metro, and then he's hired by Universal. And that is where Irving Thalberg saw that he had potential. He worked with Lon Chaney there originally in a film called The Wicked Darling, which luckily does still survive. It turned up in the last 20 years or so, I believe. And he was a director of a lot of Priscilla Dean pictures, and she was kind of an action hero star from that period. And very successful. The films were working very well. He did a number of titles outside the law, where he also worked with his sidekick in The Unknown is an actor named John George, and he works with John George there the first time. So in a way, The Unknown, there's a little bit of a reunion there with him and Chaney, John George, and then Chaney had also worked with Norman Carey back at Universal on The Hunchback of Notre Dame and on, of course, The Phantom of the Opera. So, unfortunately, Mr. Browning developed a bit of a drinking problem. It seems to be a theme that recurs through his working career, and he drinks himself out of Universal. During the period that he's out of Universal and he doesn't have a solid contracted gig, he makes a few films for FBO, and that one of those films is the second feature of tonight's show, Dollar Down, and I'll talk more about that before that feature. He kind of rehabilitates himself enough, but his real lucky break is he goes to MGM, and guess who's working there? Irving Thalberg. And he has a story that he wants to shoot and gives it to Thalberg, and it's The Unholy Three, which had been a very popular novel. And Thalberg sees it like, wow, because now Lon Chaney is working at MGM, and he sees it as a great vehicle for Lon Chaney. And with a little bit of a tune-up, that's the feature they decide to make, and Browning does get a contract. And it's kind of like, well, if you behave yourself and do well and get the film turned in on time, we'll let you make another picture, that sort of contract. And at that period, Browning had kind of cleaned himself up and did very well, and he was very good at bringing films in at the budget or under budget sometimes, and also on time. There was also, I think, a financial incentive involved too. So that brings us into his career at MGM, and I don't have the time. You could go on for, actually we could have multiple screenings to discuss all the things he did at MGM. But we'll just say that he and their collaborations were very successful. MGM saw this and said, well, good, making money. So they kept them going. They didn't exclusively work together, but by 1927, we come to tonight's first feature in the film that he is considered one, if not his best, certainly one of the best of his silent pictures he made with Chaney, The Unknown. And it's very tempting to go into all these amazing details on how the film was made. But I took a look, I don't know if you guys saw it, but Guillermo del Toro had tweeted about this show tonight, about The Unknown, a gut punch of a masterpiece. And then he finishes with, and the less you know about it, the better you will like it. And so I thought, yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense. It's like a magician. What if he shows you how the trick is done and then shows you the trick? Not as much fun. But it was shot, I think they started in early February of 1927, and it wrapped up about 35 days later, about March 18th. You'll see in the film Norman Carey, as I mentioned before. He plays the strong man. Joan Crawford's making an early appearance here. She had recently changed her name from Lucille Lesueur. And MGM said, well, Lesueur sounds like sewer, so we got to come up with a better name for you. And so Joan Crawford, and she had so many nice things to say about both the gentlemen. Todd Browning said very patient, she was just starting out, but she really had a lot of praise for Lon Chaney, and she was almost afraid to talk to him because he was a pretty famous actor at that point. But she said that he was the one that made her realize, what the difference was between standing in front of a camera and acting in front of a camera. And she said the way that Chaney would just become the character, and it was just awe-inspiring. And you can't have much more higher praise, from actor to actor when they have so many good things to say. Let's see. The film was a hit, did real well. It was released right around the time when Lindbergh made his famous Crossing, and but that didn't hurt the box office too much. It did pretty well. Let's see here. So what we're going to watch tonight. Now, for years the film was lost, as you know. We'll never know the true number, but somewhere around 80% of all silent film is lost. And occasionally one will turn up. We won't get everything back, but occasionally. And in this case, The Unknown was lost for many years, and some researchers were looking through a vault at the Cinémathèque Française, and there was a print of a film that was listed unknown. And it had been, the archivist had said, "Oh, we don't know what this film is. It's called Unknown." So it was put into the room with all the other unknown films that they didn't know what it was. Well, these researchers, I think this was in the early 70s, went through and they took a look and realized, it was the unknown. And the film, once again, I think MGM actually had a print that circulated in the 1970s and on. Let's see, what am I forgetting? There's a little bit, you'll notice in a few scenes, and I won't, just as a stylistic note, that look like they have like a little bit of a gauze or a curtain in front, and that was kind of a technique that different cameramen at that period of time were experimenting with. And when you see the Joan Crawford character with the Norman Carey character, when their romance is blooming, you'll see that effect. So in case you're wondering what that is, I'm guessing a lot of you probably already know that, but just in case. It's also, Browning usually liked to have his camera kind of invisible. He didn't do a lot of moving shots or a lot of cutting. But in this film, you'll notice near the end, he kind of harkens back to his days with D.W. Griffith, who, as the action as the crescendo rises, you'll notice that there's a lot more, the cutting is a lot quicker, and it adds to the excitement. And I'll leave, let's see, and then the restoration, the reason why there's 10 more minutes, there was always a few little parts in The Unknown that you could look and you could see that it looks like they're having a conversation, but it looks like all of a sudden it kind of changes locations. And the lost footage never really affected the story that much, but I'm guessing that they found those missing parts that you could tell that something had been there, but we just didn't know what. And this print was found in the Czech Republic at the Gift That Keeps on Giving, the National Archive in Prague. They keep finding things, and we really take our hat off to them. We're working on another project with them very soon for a film that we only had part of, and they now have a nitrate print that we're going to borrow to complete it. And I will finish with this, a quote. Chaney's biographer, Michael F. Blake, had reported Michael Blake is a pretty famous makeup artist, and he worked on a film with Burt Lancaster. And Burt Lancaster looked at his makeup kit and noticed he had a picture of Lon Chaney on the case. And they started talking about Lon Chaney, and Michael Blake reported this quote from Burt Lancaster when they were talking about The Unknown. Burt Lancaster said that The Unknown has the most compelling and emotionally exhaustive scene he had ever seen an actor perform. And you will get to see that exhausting scene tonight, and hopefully you'll like as much as that I do, certainly, and certainly many other folks. But something that is never exhausting is the music of Cliff Ritalik, who will, using his magical fingers, will take us to destinations dark and unknown. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it, and The Unknown.